So our next speaker, I hope you're all familiar with. It certainly pops up a lot in the news, and for all the right reasons. I think probably one of the strongest voices of reason that we have amidst all of the hyperbole around crime rates and offending and whatnot. So he's been the director of the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research since 1988. He's published or has written 3 books and over 200 articles, reports, chapters and various other bits and pieces. He does a great job, I think, in terms of really bringing to the forefront for New South Wales the concept of evidence-based, using sound research and evidence to drive criminal practice, not just for corrective services, but for the criminal justice system as a whole. And certainly, if you aren't familiar with his work, and if you aren't familiar with the Bureau's website, I strongly encourage you to go and look it up, because there's a lot of really valuable information in there. Corrective services also collaborate with him on a regular basis in terms of studies such as the recent study on parole reoffending, CSO, ICOs, and various other things. So with great pleasure, I introduce to you Dr. Don Weatherburn.
Thanks, everybody. I must say, when Jason asked me if I would be willing to speak, I was a bit intimidated because I'm a bit of a fraud, really. I haven't spoken to a prisoner since 1983. I imagine you've spoken to thousands in the last few years. So if what I say appears not to resonate with your experience, I apologise, but I'm happy to say I think you're going to be pretty pleased with what I'm going to tell you. Well, I hope you are. If you're not, you're just miserable. So this is a joint study we did with Corrective Services, and the background to it is that, and you will know most of this, that about 35,000 people each year are sentenced to prison. Most are released to parole, but a fair proportion are not. In 2012-13, for example, 25% of prisoners were released from New South Wales prisons without any supervision conditions at all. Now, probation and parole costs money. It costs far less, of course, than prison does, but it's remarkable how little research has actually been done, or rigorous research has been done into the effectiveness or cost effectiveness of parole. So we thought this is a fabulous opportunity, given that New South Wales has this strange system whereby you can come out of prison supervised or come out without any supervision at all, raises the possibility or the scope, if you like, for actually comparing or assessing the effectiveness of supervision. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about. Bit of background first. Shute in 2004 said after 35 years of research, it's still unclear whether parole release has a beneficial effect. I know all of you, no doubt, on a daily basis are sure that it has, but when you look at the academic research on the effectiveness of parole, it's amazingly depressing reading. That sentiment made by Shute was echoed later on by Solomon, Kachnowski and Barty in 2005. They repeated the same story. And some of the studies which claim to have found no effect for parole have actually been quite rigorous. Jackson, for example, conducted a randomised controlled trial in 1983 and reached the conclusion that parole doesn't have any effect. And Drake and Banowski came to the same sort of conclusion. It's important to remember, though, that what works or doesn't work in the United States, where most of this research gets done, doesn't mean it won't work in Australia. The milieu is different, the social conditions are different, the availability of treatment is different, the attitudes of the community are different. So you can't simply assume that what doesn't work in the United States will not work here, or vice versa, what does work there will work here. All of which is to say, we thought it was important to do our own study and have a look at the effectiveness of parole in Australia and New South Wales in particular. I must digress to say, I thought it was, when I first walked in, kind of weird to have these screens all around the room, and I thought for a second about half the audience would have their back to me looking at some screen. But I noticed that most of you have turned around. There's one bloke right up the back there, though. Yeah, you're the one. Just by way of background too for Australia, there's only really been 2 Australian studies of the effectiveness of supervision, and they both point in different directions. Broadhurst and Lowe compared reoffending among parolees to reoffending among people who had released without supervision, and Smith and they found that supervision was effective. Smith and Jones was a former research manager of mine, they found the opposite effect, that it didn't make any difference. But the problem with these simple comparisons is, well, there are several problems. One of them is that you really need to be absolutely sure you're comparing apples with apples. You just can't compare one group that's supervised with another group that's not without making a serious effort to ensure that the two groups are alike in all other relevant respects. That's absolutely crucial, and it's one of the great challenges of correctional evaluation. The second thing, which I've only lately come to, is that there's a tendency to assume if the court orders supervision, that supervision is actually occurring. Most of you will know that the level of supervision is in fact determined by the LSIR assessment process. So many people who are nominally on supervision aren't actually being supervised. So if you're going to compare supervised orders with non-supervised orders, it's important to actually make sure that supervision is occurring before you take off. And that's where corrective services have been working closely with us. Without them to tell us who was and who wasn't under intense supervision, we wouldn't have been able to do this study. You probably don't want to know too much in the way of technical detail, but for those of you who are closet statisticians, we're using propensity score matching rather than the usual regression methods. Anybody here familiar with propensity score matching? Oh, what a relief. That's great. Okay, so I saw one hand up there. Okay, so look, it's not a magic trick. There's nothing super special about it. The distinctive thing about propensity score matching is that it's a technique which allows you to be much more certain that the two groups you're comparing are identical than the normal kind of run a regression and institute some controls statistically. You can actually see to what extent the two groups are identical. If you want to know more about this, best to have a look at the report on our website. You can see what I'm talking about. So we include a wider range of controls. We look at a wider range of outcomes I'll come to in a minute. And we restrict our attention to offenders we know have been actively supervised. So these are the questions we had. Does unconditional release increase the speed, the risk, speed or seriousness of further offending compared with conditional release? And does less intensive supervision increase the risk, speed or seriousness of further offending compared with more intense supervision? The dependent variables, time to reoffend, days between release from custody and the first new proven offence, minus any time they spend in custody, and we only count offences that occur after release. Remember that some people are picked up after release for offences that occurred before they went to custody. We screen those out, so we're only interested in offences that are proved to have occurred after release from custody. We look at seriousness in terms of whether or not the offender was convicted of an indictable offence versus a summary offence, and we look at frequency of offending at 12, 24 and 36 months. Am I going too slowly? Too quickly? Okay. So thanks to, again, to corrective services, we're able to distinguish between what they call compliance-focused contact, which is contact as I understand it. Is Gerard Van Dorn in the audience anywhere? He's because I was going to, put to him, he could explain this better than I can. But this is essentially contact between the probation and parole officer and the offender, which is merely designed to ensure that they're complying with the conditions of their parole, as opposed to what he called rehabilitation-focused contact, which may include that supervision component, but which also includes a serious effort to, arranging counselling or doing what you would normally do to try and reduce the risk of further offending, or, if you like, address those criminogenic needs. I'm a bit insecure when I'm at this point because I don't know too much about actually running a probation and parole service. So if I've got this wrong, I'm sure my learned colleague over there will correct me. No doubt he's itching to ask an awkward question which he knows the answer to already. So these are our independent variables. The main independent variables are the obvious ones: post-release supervision, whether supervised or not. Supervision intensity, which is scored 1 if it's higher than the median monthly number of contacts, or 0 if it's lower, or the same. And we've got that separately for compliance and rehabilitation-focused supervision. Is that okay so far? Everybody okay? There are our controls. I won't read them all out. The beauty of our reoffending database is that we've got the criminal history of everybody who's had any contact with the New South Wales criminal justice system since 1994. So we know their full history, and that makes it much easier to ensure that we are comparing like with like. In addition, since we've been working more closely with corrective services, we're also able to match on their LSIR score. That's great from our point of view because the LSIR taps into things that the criminal justice system doesn't know about. No point here explaining what the LSIR is. I assume everybody in this room knows it backwards. Would that be right? Okay. How much does it cost every time you administer that thing? $1? I'm going to quit and set up a business and charge 50 cents. Okay, so what's our sample? 7,494 offenders released from New South Wales prisons between 1 January 2009 and 30 June 2010 after serving a full-time imprisonment sentence of 12 months or less. Why 12 months or less? Because if we had allowed in people who served much longer sentences, we would have been stretching it to argue they were comparable groups of offenders. So we're looking for people who could have gone either way. People who got a 12 months or less sentence, had they come into contact with a less punitive judge, could have gone the other way and got themselves released without conditions. You don't need to know the data sources. So we're doing, this is just especially for the gentleman over there who knows about propensity score matching. You'll be pleased to know we're using a caliper here of 0.0005. Everybody got that? What is that, you're asking me? Anyway, that basically means that the two offenders we compare, the one that got supervision and the one that didn't get supervision, differed by less than 0.0005 in the likelihood of getting a supervised order. That's essentially what we're saying. There was almost no difference in their likelihood of getting a supervised order. We use the accelerated, this is again from my colleague over there who knows about propensity score matching, accelerated failure time distribution. You'd be pleased to know we're doing that because the proportional hazards assumption isn't met. I'm addressing my friend over here. You can just talk amongst yourselves for a minute. And we use the AIC to choose the appropriate model. Okay, so we managed to match 3/4 of the 2,772 offenders in the supervised group. One of the key issues is how many can you match? There are quite a few that you can't, and you're really hoping that you'll get good matches, and we got very good matches. So I'll just skip that. So this is time to reoffend results. So first up on the top row there, you've got the number of offenders. So we're matching, comparing 2019 unsupervised offenders who are exactly matched with 2019 supervised group, and the unadjusted time ratio. This is just before we actually make any attempt to control for anything else. You can see that the supervised group is, where are we? Less likely to fail compared with the unsupervised group. The supervised group is takes longer to fail than the supervised group, than the unsupervised group. When you adjust it, it drops away a little bit, but it's still statistically significant. Or if you like, in plain terms, just looking at the 12-month mark, you've got 48.6% of the people in the unsupervised group having been reconvicted of a further offence after release, compared with 43.6%. They're small, I'll come back to that point in a minute, but they are not big enough to be not due to chance. At the 12-month mark, that difference persists, 63% reoffending for the unsupervised group and 58% for the supervised group. And at the 36-month mark, you've got that. All of those are significant. Well, you may say that's tiny, you know, that tiny little percentage point difference. Let me tell you that reconviction is a very crude measure of reoffending. You need big differences in actual reoffending rates to produce small differences in reconviction rates. So those small differences probably belie quite substantial differences in the actual underlying offending rates of the two groups. I thought at this point you'd all be cheering and happy. I mean, I'm just confirming the value of your work and you're all so quiet. Okay, so let's look at seriousness and frequency. So here we're looking at the... Did I hear a question in the offing? No, all right. So looking at whether they convicted of any new indictable offence, that's the more serious end of the spectrum. So 51.3% of the unsupervised group were convicted of an indictable offence, compared with 46.1, again, significant. Looking in terms of the number of new offences, you can see the mean was 1.8 for the unsupervised group and 1.4 for the supervised group. Can you see those numbers up the back? Oh, of course, you've got your own little screen. Okay. All right. And at the 36-month mark, it's 4.3 compared with 3.6. Don't you think this is fantastic? We were so excited. I'm so pleased to see emotion. You have no idea how many programs we evaluate and nothing happens, and it's so depressing. So, you know, there was a real eureka moment when the button was pushed and these results came up. Then, of course, Jason Hainsworth sees it and starts to pull it apart and dream up reasons why it can't be true. Sometimes you wonder whose side he's really on. So this is looking at compliance-focused supervision. So how do we fare if we're just looking at supervision versus non-supervision, where we're only looking at compliance-focused? And this is even more good news. The unadjusted time difference is not significantly different. In other words, if you're just focusing on compliance, there's no difference between supervision and no supervision for the time to reoffend. No difference either for the percent reoffending at 12, 24 or 36 months. Isn't that great? Because we all know you're there to do more than just watch offenders. Well, that's what I thought. Anyway, here's the really good news. This is for compliance focused. Again, no significant differences at all when you're just looking at compliance. So what happens when you switch to rehabilitation focused? Well, it just gets better and better. So you've got 48%, time to reoffend is longer for the supervision group, both adjusted and unadjusted. The adjusted just takes into account any other factors that might be influencing that. But look at the bottom three rows, if that should be pretty clear for you. So you've got 48.8, 49% compared with 42% reoffending. This is for the rehabilitation supervision, and that persists right through to the 24 and the 36-month mark. So, I mean, I think this is a fabulous demonstration of the importance of your work, but I'll have a few more things to say about that in a sec. Seriousness and frequency. Here's the only black spot on the landscape. We didn't find any significant difference for rehabilitation-focused supervision in terms of any new indictable offence. It was significant for the percentage of people who reoffended within 12 months, not significant for the 24 months. Part of the reason for this is probably that you're getting small numbers down, but you can't expect everything to go the way you want it to go. I mean, it is science after all. I didn't fake the results. So this is for those of you who hated numbers all the way through this presentation. Ticks and crosses for you. Is supervision better? Tick speed, tick seriousness, tick frequency. Is more intense rehabilitation focused supervision better? Yes, tick speed, tick seriousness, and sort of tick cross for those who are looking at frequency, and big boo for more intense supervision, which is nothing but that. Big boo. So, why does this matter? Well, it matters because of the work you're doing, obviously. It matters because you're keeping the community safer than they would otherwise be, but it matters for other reasons as well. I don't know about other states, but I can tell you that in New South Wales they have this grand plan to reduce overall rates of reoffending. And it's interesting to ask yourself the question, if that's the plan, what's the mechanism by which we're going to do that? Look at our programs and how many people do they reach? Well, we've got a few programs to reduce reoffending. We've got the Young Youth on Track. Well, I should point out, first of all, we've got 32,000 people in New South Wales reoffending each year. It's a shocking state to live in. And if we're going to reduce that by 5 percentage points, we've got to get 5,000 fewer reoffenders. That's what we need to achieve our state plan goal. Is anybody from the Cabinet Office here? Just kidding. Okay, so if we're going to do 5,000, how are we going to reach them? Well, the Youth on Track reaches 104. That's a start. Credit reaches 182. That's a little bit better. The Drug Court gets 253. Merit, which we know works, gets to 1,996. But guess what Corrective Services New South Wales reaches? 12,577. So Corrective Services supervision is our only hope. And I don't mean that... I don't mean that entirely lightheartedly, although Rosemary's cracking herself over there. The point is this: it's hard reducing reoffending. You all know that, and I know that because I've seen the results of meta-analyses. You don't get many miracle cures. What does that mean if you want to reduce the overall rate of reoffending? It means you've got to reach a lot of people. You're not going to produce a huge reduction in a small group and reduce the state rate. You've got to look for small gains across a large number of people, and you are the people who are capable of doing just that. Thank you.